We're going to face a financial crisis. Our debt makes it inevitable, and when it happens, it will seem obvious at the time, even though everyone ignores it now. We're already seeing the narrative start to form. For example, The Economist magazine on February 12th published a cover story titled, "When the Ride Ends, What Would Happen If the Financial Markets Crashed?" Basically, they're telegraphing what comes next. They always do, by the way. It's sort of like James Bond villains who feel compelled to explain their diabolical plot before they execute it. The good news is that their plot provides us a roadmap to protect our families and maybe even save the day. Everything we're talking about is economic warfare, plain and simple. And our strategy, it's also pretty simple. First, in an economic war, the weapon is money, and we will see some crazy things happen with money. Take a look at the Zimbabwe $100 note from the year 2008. It had no real value, about $20 US. 10 years later, they were printing $100 trillion notes that weren't worth pennies. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen here. We're a long way from Zimbabwe, at least at this point. But I do want you to know that strange things happen in a financial crisis. For example, did you ever expect that a virus would cause a near total worldwide shutdown, or that city managers could lock you in your home? To be prepared, you'll need a game plan. In fact, that's the title of my second book on economic warfare, Game Plan: How to Protect Yourself from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. We published this in 2014. A lot's happened since then, but I can tell you that I still believe the book is spot on in its advice. We'll summarize some of that in our battle plan for this episode. Let me read a few chapter titles. We've got A World of Risk, This Time is Different, Making It Personal, What to Do When Crisis Strikes, The Gold Rush. What about stocks? What's a bond bubble? Beyond the dollar, Why Money in the Mattress is a Bad Idea, Guaranteed Investments, Hedge Funds and Other Out-of-the-Box Investments, A Sane Strategy for an Insane World, There is Hope, plus an appendix titled Protecting Your Family. I read through it again while preparing for this episode. It's a good book, and it's more applicable today than when I published it 8 years ago. To give you an example of how accurate the book has been, let me share a few thoughts. In Chapter 1, starting on page 16, there's a section titled What Comes Next. There's 7 pages warning about a disruptive cyber attack on our financial system and who could be doing it. This is the very threat that the World Economic Forum is suggesting will happen soon. I was a part of several legitimate war games on this subject, and I can tell you the answer is not a great reset government takeover of the economy, but I fear that's what will be attempted. Now, Chapter 2 starts with the inflation threat on page 26. It speaks of reckless money printing and debt hell. It even discusses the possible end of the dollar as reserve currency. I wrote this over 8 years ago, and it's playing out in the headlines right now. None of this should come as a shock. Unfortunately, our government has done the opposite of preparing us. They've actually made us more vulnerable, and the pandemic has made things even worse. One more thing. When Game Plan was first published, the #1 objection to the entire book was that people could not believe that China was an enemy. Now, I'm going to read to you. Let me read from page 46. A common objection to my warning is that the Chinese are so connected to our economy that they would never harm us. The idea that the Chinese would never harm us is ridiculous on its face. There are Chinese who continually hack our systems and who manipulate and undermine our markets. But don't the Chinese hold much in dollar debt? They couldn't afford to see the dollar go down. China's military doesn't care and has a much larger view of things than the next quarter's export sales. The smug response of those who believe China needs us so much that it remains our friend is another example of American arrogance. It may seem hard to believe, but when I went on a roadshow with Game Plan, people regularly challenged me over China. They would not, they could not, China could never be our adversary. Even when we started warning about Chinese control of our pharmaceuticals industry with Rosemary Gibson in episode 6 of this program, for example, there was pushback. We warned of Chinese bioweapons several years ago, but nobody seemed to notice. So what are people not noticing now? In our recent episode with Glenn Beck, we discussed modern monetary theory as the government's response to just about everything. It's the sort of thing that people who win the lottery do. They spend money like crazy. The elitists are now in power, so they're on a spending spree. The big problem is that it's our money that they're spending. I think it's all part of the plan.